Hello and welcome to the Unlocked podcast. I'm your host, Ricky Locke, professional speaker, magician and confidence coach, and quite simply, Unlocked is a journal of self-improvement. I'm talking to the experts, authors and successful people from around the world, as well as sharing my mishaps and magical adventures in my own life too, to unlock the best version of ourselves. My aim is to give you some insight and inspiration so you can unlock the best version of yourself too. Now, if this sounds like your cup of tea, then hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of my latest episodes released every Wednesday. Now, relax and enjoy the show. Hey, welcome back. This week, you're in for a real treat. I had the absolute pleasure a few months ago to interview Madeline Black. She has an amazing, deeply moving and empowering story. And this episode is all about the power of forgiveness and also why we need to encourage more people to find their voice and to find their courage. Now, obviously, we will go into the podcast into more detail, but in short, Madeline has a very unusual personal story, which she's now using to inspire and motivate other people. But Madeline was violently gang raped when she was 13 years old and raped 3 more times before even the age of 18. Traumatic experiences that she's shared in her life, and probably more than most people will ever receive in their life. But now she's on an absolute powerful mission to now inspire people with the power of forgiveness and also to find their voice. This is an amazing podcast episode. Madeline was an absolute pleasure to talk to, and you're going to learn so much from this episode. But Madeline, thank you for coming onto the podcast episode. And again, thank you to all of the patrons supporting this podcast. Thank you, Chris Lovett, Sherry Brenton, Anthony Howe, Steve McDermott, and Rory Barnes for your continued support. If you want to find out more about the Patreon community, head over to the link in the show notes. But without further ado, enjoy the episode with Madeline Black. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Unlocked. Today, my guest, I am joined by a speaker, author, podcaster, and sexual violence activist. Welcome to the show, Madeline Black. Hello.
Thank you, Ricky. Lovely to be here with you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a pleasure. I've been looking forward to this for a while. I did say to you, didn't I, that I will eventually have you on, and I did reach out to you on LinkedIn and said, I will come to you soon. And now the time is finally here. So thank you so much for coming on. How are you? How's your week been so far?
So far, it's good. It's Friday today, so that's always good.
Good, yeah, good. Yes, I'm really looking forward to this. So, Madeline, there's a really powerful story that you have that is absolutely... It's unbelievable, but absolutely amazing. And I can't wait to obviously deep dive into this, because the mission that you have right now in empowering others to find their voice is just beautiful. So before we deep dive into that, to give the listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do, tell us a little bit about what it is that you do.
Yeah, well, I share my own lived experience. I'm a survivor of sexual violence, and I really share it to end the stigma, the shame, the silence that surrounds rape and sexual violence, but really to help other people, men, women, find their courage and find their voice too. Because I think, when we don't speak out and it eats us up inside, it occupies too much space inside our bodies and it just holds us back. So yeah, as you said, I'm really passionate about helping people find their voice, end the silence and speak their truth.
Yeah, I love that. And the story that you have is just absolutely, it's quite, if I'm honest, for me as was that a dog?
Sorry, that's my
right.
co-host.
No worries. So yeah, for me, it's quite a challenging conversation, because in terms of empathy and in terms of imagining this, which we're going to speak about in a second, I think you're an absolutely inspirational woman. So Madeline, if you're happy to share to the listeners, tell us about your story that's kind of got you to this point now of helping others.
When you said it's quite an unusual story, I would have to actually correct you and say my story is just a common story of many women and men somewhere on this planet every day. Someone will be raped. So, I don't think my story is extraordinary. Maybe how I've walked it through, it might be a little bit different to other people, but it basically started when I was 13 on a night out with a girlfriend. Did what most teenagers did, lied to our parents, bought some alcohol. Her mum was away, so we lied to where we were both meant to be staying, had the use of an empty flat, got very drunk, and subsequently 2 young men from the cafe we were drinking in secret took us back to her mum's empty flat and they both proceeded to rape me over a 4 to 5 hour period. Came quite close to being killed, but one of them stopped what I call the worst one. Didn't think it would be a good idea, thankfully. Otherwise, I would not be here today and have married my husband and had my 3 fabulous daughters. Yes, so that's what took place. And even then, back in the late 1970s, being 13, I had bought into these rape victim messages, all the rape culture that was around, that if I spoke about it or told anyone, they also threatened to kill me at the very end. But I believed it was my fault. I had taken on so much shame. You know, what did I expect? I'd lied to my parents. I wasn't where I was meant to be. I'd been drinking. We'd met boys. So I just thought it was something that I had brought onto myself. So we didn't speak about it and just went back to school as if everything was normal. But clearly, what we don't speak about has got to come out of your system somehow. And again, it affected me in many, many, many ways for many years until I finally got the courage to heal, I guess.
Yeah, and I've noticed in your story that there was a time where, when you went to speak about what obviously happened, you wrote a letter, I believe, to your parents.
I did, because I couldn't find my actual voice. It was like just numb in my throat. It was a night that I'd gone out, which my mum said don't go out, so I was very rebellious. I think I was hoping that, I don't know now, maybe subconsciously, if I behaved really badly, they would just guess, they would understand. I would go into her room and just stand there and never say anything. I was hoping that she could just extract the information from my head. Obviously, that's not possible. So I did write this note, and eventually they called my friend who was involved, and she said it didn't happen like I said it had, that, they were nice boys. They just brought us home. They were both sons of diplomats, and they wouldn't have done that. But they did. My dad wanted to go to the police, and he was insistent, and I was terrified because I thought they would kill me. And my mum was just really quiet, and it took me a lot of time to understand her silence, and she has given me permission to share her story and to write about it in my book. And I didn't know, my dad didn't know, he never knew, even when he passed away, that my mum had been raped as an 8-year-old by a neighbour several times. So she never got help. She never went for therapy. I've had shitloads of therapy over decades, which is how I've got to where I'm at. And she just, had to process it all herself. So she couldn't say anything because all of her unprocessed trauma in that moment just came up to meet her, and she was just silenced. So, yeah, but I misunderstood that for a long time and harboured a lot of resentment towards her, thinking, oh, she doesn't believe me either. But that was never the case.
Yeah. And at that point, when you are, you're openly sharing the horrific experience that happened, and then to obviously your friend to obviously say, this didn't happen. To that point on, I guess, how did you proceed with just keeping it? I think you've mentioned this before on another podcast about like the Jack in the Box, about pushing everything down and trying to live your life. How do you have the courage to carry on with life, knowing that this unspeakable thing had happened, and then obviously not doing anything about it, like nothing would happen? Your friend denied it. Obviously, you wanted to take it further. How did you live with that?
Well, I guess I wasn't really living. I was doing whatever I could to block it out, to numb out, to push it far, far down, like you say, that Jack in the Box. It wasn't really, it was existing. I was just going through the motions. At that point, I hardly spoke. I became really, I guess, selectively kind of mute for a few years. I was a teenager already, but I just kind of grunted responses within my family, didn't really converse much with them. And before they knew what happened, they actually nicknamed me the Ice Maiden, because I was just so shut off. It's amazing how we can just detach our head from our heart and just numb out. So at that stage of my life, I was drinking quite a lot. I was doing a lot of drugs. I developed anorexia. I had already attempted suicide. I'd spent 6 months in a children's psychiatric ward, and even in there, they didn't get to the bottom of why I had this depression. But I just spiraled out of control and just hated myself, just didn't think there was any point to me, was just in a dark, dark hole for a long time.
Yeah, well, it's really difficult to imagine anyone going through obviously what you went through. And I know that now that it kind of from that point on, you went out to, I believe, is it Israel, to spend a year working there, and you met obviously your now husband, and that kind of changed your life around a bit.
It did. My parents suggested, because they discovered, I was doing a lot of drugs, and my mum thought, I guess, what she thought was a good idea at the time. But the worst thing for any teenage daughter is that she called every single one of my friends' parents to say exactly what we were up to. So I wasn't too popular at that point at school. And she said, why don't you just go away for a year, get away from the bad scene? So I did. I went to Israel. My first 6 months on kibbutz used to grow grass wild everywhere. So maybe in reflection now we laugh about it. I said, you took me from one drug scene to another big drug scene. So that was a good time then. But then I met, sorry, there's my co-host again. Then I met Stephen, a Glaswegian all the way over in Israel. And yeah, it did really flip my life around.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm absolutely amazed by your story, because one of the things we discussed when we first met was that you've done an amazing TEDx talk. So we'll put a link in the show notes for anyone to go watch this. It's an amazing, absolutely emotional story. And I know now that you're on this incredible path and this journey to inspire people and empower people to find their voice and, to speak up. And what was the spark that then started you on this journey? You've obviously gone through this life-changing experience and kind of pushed it down in that jack-in-the-box metaphor, and then started to kind of have a life and a bit of a family and kind of carry on. And then at some point there was a catalyst, I believe, when your daughter turned a certain age, that's then started to get you into a new journey.
Anna became 13, so the age that I was, and I'm a psychotherapist as well, so it's always going to come back. We always think we can push it down and never face it, but looking back now, again, I was existing. I had put on this veneer, this mask, and I pretended everything was great. I was a perfect mum, the perfect wife, and I had the perfect homemaker, but actually underneath it I was like a swan, I guess, just graceful up above, but paddling like crazy to keep up all the time. And it was tough because it was exhausting. And Anna turned 13, and all the memories, the triggers, the nightmares, the dreams, the pictures just came in. And I decided to go to therapy, really the worst kind of client, because I said, I want you to take these memories away. And he said, well, about lobotomy, it's not really possible. They come back, I understand now, when you're ready to face them. And I just thought, I didn't want this to be my weather, to hover over me all my life, till the end of my days, constantly being afraid, having so many fears and phobias, paranoid about being around men, being out of control, my safety. It just impacted everything that I did, There was so much risk assessment, I guess, went into every single thing that I did, even to put the bins out if Stephen was away, to put them at the end of the garden. I think, oh, well, they can just wait till next week, it's fine. I'm too scared to walk in my own garden. So fear was my friend for years, a long, long time. So as you say, I went back to therapy, and just, I guess, near to the end, my therapist at the time, Ron, said to me, maybe these men weren't born rapists. And I was just so angry with him. I thought, how could he say such a ridiculous statement? Of course they were. They're animals and blah, blah. But he just planted a little thought, like a little seed in my head, and it just started to take shoots and started to grow and ground itself in me. And I thought, maybe they weren't. And it just sent me on this journey of inquiry, of trying to understand. I mean, you have a little baby and you look at that baby and you think they're a blank sheet. They come into this world perfect beings, I believe, and somehow they get corrupted, they get conditioned by, hopefully not parenting, but, experiences, schooling, education, influences, all that stuff. Sorry to put the fear of you into your lovely little baby.
Yeah, thank you.
But they get corrupted and conditioned. And I just started to wonder, what had gone so wrong for these two young men? They were only like 17, 18, so they weren't much older. They had a privileged lifestyle, doesn't make any difference. But how do they know to be so violent and just dehumanizing to another person? How do they have such little regard for me? And somehow, don't ask me where it came from, because I was never going to forgive them. I felt compassion in my heart, because I thought, I've done a really good job of living my life, because I very nearly didn't become a mum, but I thought, if I don't do that, they've won. So I thought my best revenge is going to have my girls, or I didn't know they were going to be girls, obviously, at the time, have my kids and just live my life as best as I can. I tried to refuse to let it be my identity, but obviously it did have an impact on me in the early days. But I just thought, they've got to live with what they did to someone. And, I've made the best of my life. But I think that must be hard to live with how you've hurt someone. And then somehow I just saw forgiveness. And to me, I guess forgiveness is about understanding, it's about acceptance, it's about compassion, it's letting it go, changing what we desperately want to change, letting go of that idea that actually I can't go back and change history. This is what happened to me. Because in those 3 years, I had the ability to drive myself crazy because I was so caught up in denial. And I used to say to my therapist, I've worked at Women's Aid for 14 years. I worked at Rape Crisis for 6 years. I'm a therapist. I've heard so many women and men's stories. Maybe I've just got false memory syndrome. I would just say everything and anything to avoid accepting the truth, because I just thought, come on, if it was that bad, I'd remember that. But now I understand as a therapist that, I was a client at the time, so my therapist said, didn't come into it, that we shut down what we don't want to remember, what's too traumatic for our mind. And eventually, whether you believe it or not, when it comes back, you are ready to face it. Because I hated going to those sessions, because I knew what I was working with. I'd be sick in the sessions. I would shake, I would cry, I'd just be hysterical before, during, and after. And it affected me for 3, 4, 5 days. And then 2 days later, it was time for my next weekly appointment. So it was hell, those 3 years. And nightmares, waking up thinking they were hovering over me, seeing their faces. But it is the most difficult thing I've ever done, but the most, I guess, liberating, because it allowed me to let go. And I never, ever thought I would find a place where I could forgive, which doesn't mean I forget. I could never, ever forgive the act of rape, because it is a total violation, not just on my body, but my mind and my psyche. And I'm not a forgiveness preacher. I don't tell people that this is the only path. There's so many paths to healing, and everybody's path is going to look very different, but this is just how I chose to do it. And it really just, I guess it cut my links, that was changed to them. But first I had to learn to forgive me, because I was just a naive 13-year-old girl that went on a night out that went horribly wrong, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. It's you mentioned obviously about my daughter, and we were having this conversation beforehand, and I think my daughter, obviously I knew your story from TEDx last year, but now having a daughter, although I can't imagine obviously anyone going through what you went through, but now I have a daughter, to think, like you were saying there, for anyone to have that power of forgiveness, I couldn't imagine what I would be like, if my daughter had grown up and gone through that same experience. And to think, like you were saying, oh my God, how on earth has Madeline even forgiven these people? That's just something that's so powerful that where does that come from? Where did that come from? I know that it was a seed planted, like you said, like from the therapist, but how did that then evolve into finally saying,
it was never for them. There's nothing about them. I didn't have to have a meeting, meet them for a cup of tea, write a letter from them, or hear from them. It was for me, because I'd put myself into a prison by all the trauma and just the denying it and refusing to let go of it. And by refusing to let go, what we resist, it persists. So the more I said, oh, this didn't happen, I would just be bombarded with memories. And oh man, what's going on? Till I eventually woke up. I'm the one that's keeping me stuck in this trauma cycle. I'm the one that's perpetuating it. It's done. It had finished, 30 odd years ago, whenever I first went to therapy. But I'm keeping these pictures alive, and it was always for me. It was never anything about them. I don't wish them any harm now. For years, I was filled with revenge. I wanted them to experience exactly what had hurt me, someone to take them somewhere, tie them up, beat them up, torture them for 4 or 5 hours so they would get it. But that would make me just as bad as them, really, wouldn't it? So it was a bit twisted in some way. So I just thought, this is just for me. I've got to find a way to make peace with what happened, because, I'm 56 now. I was 13 at the time. If I continue to the end of my days, what kind of message is that for my girls that I struggled to give? What kind of message is that to anyone I'm working with when I was a psychotherapist, that actually will stay stuck in our trauma for life? So I do believe now that maybe I've got post-traumatic growth, that actually we can grow through what we go through. And that has really shown me and helped me to show other people that all of us are just so much stronger than we think we are. I mean, it takes a lot of energy to hold on to all that negativity. It's bound to have an impact on our mind and our health, our well-being. And to let it go was just like, oh, this is just a different life completely. So it's very freeing and it's very liberating. And it was always for me. It was never for them, always.
I love that. That's just brilliant. Yeah.
Hey, it's Ricky here, and I'm just pausing the episode really quickly to remind you that you can watch video episodes with all guests, receive bonus behind-the-scenes content, and extra episodes, all for as little as just the price of a cup of coffee. You can do this in the Unlocks Patreon community, but rather than me tell you why you should join, here's one of our Patreon members and what they have to say.
Why do I think being a patron of the Unlock podcast is awesome? Ricky. That's it. I've known Ricky for a very long time. We worked together back in the day at Argos. He's always been supportive, engaging, and one hell of a magician. Still don't know how he does half that stuff. This podcast is everything that Ricky is all about, and being a patron, I get to support him in this journey, and I get to learn some really useful stuff along the way. We get some exclusive content as patrons, and it's so worth missing out on a coffee each month. So come and join us. You won't regret it.
So just like Ant, to get involved, head to patreon.com/The Unlock Podcast or click the link in the show notes and come and join the fun. Now, back to the episode.
Madeline, if I was to ask you a question, how do you define forgiveness?
Yeah, I guess if you ask everybody, they'll all have their own different answers. So I am a story with an organisation, which was where I first shared my story, 2017, I think it was, with the Forgiveness Project. And when I was struggling, or when the idea was planted in my head, I actually was one of these people that went to their website and read all the people's forgiveness stories. But for me, like I said earlier, it's about understanding. It's about compassion, recognizing that I guess a lot of good people can make a lot of bad mistakes depending on their influences, how they've been corrupted or conditioned in life. That ultimately there is good in everybody. We might not be able to see that, and I didn't think it for a long time. And it's about acceptance. It's about letting go. It's about being good to myself, because filled with hate and revenge and anger and plotting all these fantasies about them, it wasn't a healthy mindset. So yeah, it's all of those things.
Yeah, it's not a great mix of ingredients, is it? It's only going to do damage, isn't it, and harm later on in life.
They call the exhibition that they run all around the world, actually, they have it in America and all around the UK, the F word, because it's a very provocative subject, forgiveness. A lot of people will say, occasionally I get messages, how dare you tell me I need to forgive my abuser, my rapist? I said, oh, I actually didn't tell you that. This is what I did. You do with it whatever you like, but that's just where they're at with their journey. I'm not there to influence anyone. They can take or leave whatever they get from what I say. This is just my journey. It's not about a self-help guide for everybody out there that's ever been raped or abused in some way. But for me, it was like the ultimate piece of my jigsaw with healing. It just was like, I can let go. All that energy of holding on is exhausting,
Of course, yeah. And that's going to lead into everything that you do in life. Yeah. So how is this now, the forgiveness, obviously it's so important, but how has this now impacted your life now? You mentioned the massive weight off your shoulders. So how has forgiveness now played this massive part in your life now?
Well, when I look back and I look at that person that I was, it's like a different person. I could never be spontaneous. I had to plan everything. I had to worry about, if I drove to a multi-story car park, if I went above one floor or two, could I take the stairs? I can't be in a lift in case somebody comes in the lift and they try to attack everything, every single thing I did. I couldn't go to the shops by myself. I couldn't do this. I couldn't do that. I couldn't fly. I couldn't travel because who would I sit to next to? What if I fall asleep and they try and touch? Everything, was just corrupted by what had happened. So all of that's left. It occupied masses of space inside of me, and now it feels like it's taken away from inside of me, and there's more space for me to turn up. The me that I was before this trauma happened to me at such a young age, and more of that as well. So I feel, I'm not only 5'2", but I feel a bigger person. Like inside, the capacity to be me, I guess, to be spontaneous, to be a bit more genuine and to be, I suppose it sounds cheesy, authentic, but to be who I really was meant to be before this ever happened to me.
Yeah, fantastic. And I'd love to hear about a little bit about now. You've obviously gone through this. Now you're in this world of forgiveness, and you've now started that journey. And the story that you've obviously been sharing is on the Forgiveness Project's website, so we'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. But you obviously have wrote a book called Unbroken, which is the same name, I believe, as your podcast as well.
It is, yeah. Well, so, the podcast is Unbroken Healing Through Storytelling, because I really believe in the power of sharing stories.
Absolutely. Fantastic. So tell us a little bit about this journey now. So you've got an amazing TEDx. I know I've said that already, but it is absolutely beautiful, beautiful TEDx. So tell us about the story now. What is it that you're doing now with this forgiveness idea and the Unbroken, the story? Tell us about the little book what's happening.
I never really intended to be a speaker or an author, and I suppose these things don't just happen to you, but it really does feel like that. So I met an extraordinary woman called Marion Partington. All of the Forgiveness Project's events are normally based in London, and I live in sunny Glasgow. And Marina, who's our founder, says, Marion's doing an event at a school in Shawlands in Glasgow. Is that near? It's like 2 minutes down the road. So I went to this. It was a multi-faith event, and she spoke. So she is the sister of Lucy Partington, who was murdered by Rose and Fred West as serial killers. And when she spoke, she just emanated this peace. Even when I think about her, it just makes me so moved. And I just saw the impact that she had on the audience. And she had written a beautiful book called If You Sit Very Still. And when I met her at the end of the night, because she's a fellow Forgiveness Project story, she wrote in my book, "Now you must speak." And I thought, I could maybe do that. I'd only just shared my story. It was, a few months prior. And the moment I had that thought, literally, I do believe that somebody had my back, because all the words just came to me. I would try to sleep at night, and I couldn't sleep because they were flying around my head. And then I'd come back to my Mac in my office, and I just started writing. Literally, like 8 weeks later, I'd written 70,000 words. And I somehow, whoever was supporting me, because I discovered, the publishing process, applying, looking at all their guidelines, sending off to publishers, to agents, the first 3 chapters, your synopsis, your cover letter. And I had loads of rejections, which is normal. But in about 3 months, I also had a contract. And I thought, looks like I'm gonna publish a book then. now it's on Audible. I've had my first translation. I'm Italian, which is quite nice to say. I hope I get more translations, because we know it's a global issue. Sadly, it's not anyway just related to the UK. Women all over the world, or men, will have experienced rape or sexual violence, abuse. And then the podcast really came about, I guess, through lockdown. So once I shared my story, I was asked to speak. And I've been very lucky. Every time I've spoken, someone in the audience will just say, "Could you come and speak here? Could you come and speak there?" So I've never really looked for speaking gigs. And then I was working as a psychotherapist, and I said to myself, maybe I should just focus more on speaking, because I'm speaking more and more, and then it's not fair to my clients if I can't make it, and I wouldn't like to let people down. And then I said to myself, I kind of like signs. I said, I'd love to work internationally, but I thought, that's never going to happen. And that was late December, a few years ago. And then literally I woke up on December the 1st. I had a Skype call with a lovely man that I met at PCA conference, Paul from Johannesburg. And he said, "You need to come and speak at our conference." I was like, "You've only read my book. You've never heard me speak." He said, "No, that's it. I've read your book. You'll be a good speaker for our conference." So, okay. And I went, okay. And then a few days after that, I was contacted by somebody who'd also been at a book event. I didn't know that she had also been the former health minister in the island of Maldives, the country of Maldives. And she said, "We're putting on a conference. It's funded by UNICEF. Would you come and speak?" I went, "Let me think about that." Yes. So that was my first international gig. So I thought, these are good signs. But obviously, 2 years ago, we had lockdown, and that all started. And then, like everybody in the events industry, my career was just starting. So I wasn't super established anyway, and everything dried up. And I just thought, I know brilliant people from the Forgiveness Project, and I'm also part of another organization called the Global Resilience Project, which is run by Emma Bell, and she's taken 50 of us. She calls us her thrivers, all with very, very different stories, and we've all kind of overcome adversity but are now all thriving. And she wanted to, I guess, research us. So she's got 9 steps, 9 secrets to thriving. I think that's the audible book. That's what it's called, 9 secrets to thriving. And so from there as well, I know these brilliant people. And I just thought, what am I going to do? I've got no speaking. And I thought, I'll start a podcast. So it was kind of my gift of lockdown, really. And it's brilliant because Marina, who started the Forgiveness Project, she doesn't call us storytellers, she calls us story healers. And I just think,
Beautiful.
yeah, when we share our stories, I don't really do it for me now. I do it for what it can do for other people. And I really believe in the power of sharing stories. And somebody hears something that's similar or something resonates with them, it gives them a bit of hope and positivity. And that time in lockdown, it was just miserable time. It was so doom and gloom. So I started it. It was November 2020, I think it started. So it's just been over a year or so now. So yeah, it's going good. It's now top 1.5% globally of all podcasts. I'm in just over 80 countries. So yeah, it's quite fascinating how it flies through the air and lands somewhere else. But yeah, it's been brilliant. I love doing it.
Absolutely. I think it's an amazing thing that you're doing. It's so moving what you're doing, and looking at all the people that you are now helping and inspiring and empowering them to find their voice. And, I know that you have this great quote, which is that we are not defined by what knocks us down, but we are defined by how we get back up. And you are, a wonderful woman now helping these people to find their own voices. So I guess really as a last question, Madeline, before I kind of explain how more people can find out more about your book and obviously the podcast, where they can find you, is if someone is listening to this right now who hasn't found that courage to find their own voice and speak up, or even wanting to seek forgiveness, what would you say to them right now listening to this episode?
It's never too late. Never too late to find your voice, to go and get help and get support. Find a therapist, find a friend. If you can't find a friend or a therapist, write it down. Stop denying your story. Write it down and then whisper it to yourself. Tell yourself your story, because we all get so caught in denial and we minimize it. We don't want to believe it, but it holds us back. It really does, when we can't free it from the insides, because it just occupies too much space. I often tell a story of being interviewed, sorry, Ricky, by fabulous people. You are one of them. But I was very privileged to be interviewed by Sir Trevor McDonald, Radio 4. And my friend's mum had been listening to the show. And basically, she was 84 at the time. That night, my friend went to see her, and she told her own story of being raped as a teenager. And she'd never, ever spoken about it. She just said she heard this woman on the radio, and everything she said was just like what happened to me. I thought it was my fault, but now I think he was to blame. And she said, what are you talking about? And so when she told her that day, she ended 64 years of her silence. And she said she's just changed. It's just lighter, more energized, and a different woman, and more secrets and more stuff is coming from her mum. So yeah, it's never ever too late to find your voice, find your courage, get support, get help, and be the person you're meant to be without all of this.
It's a beautiful message. Madeline, thank you for coming onto the show. If people want to find out more about you, more about the book, the podcast, or even want to get in touch to have you speak at the event, how do they find out more about you?
I have a website, which is madelineblack.co.uk. So I'm on all the social media. Oh, can't say that. All the social media channels as well. I need to put my teeth in. So yeah, you'll just find me wherever.
Brilliant. And we'll make sure we'll put some links in the show notes for everyone to find. Madeline, you've been an absolutely amazing guest to come on the show. I think your story is just absolutely incredible, and I love what you are doing now. Like you said, that great example right at the end there, someone in their 80s now speaking up. Thank you for coming on and just being a wonderful person, and all the best to you and everything for the future. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madeline, for being an amazing guest. And you can find out more about Madeline's amazing work that she's doing, her TED Talks and her books as well, by heading to the links in the show notes. But if you did enjoy this episode, don't forget to head over to Apple Podcasts or Podchaser, leave us a review and a rating, and it will get this podcast shared to more people. Anyway, thank you for listening to the Unlocked podcast. Take care and good luck unlocking the best version of yourself. Goodbye.